They cut my salary by 40%, without warning. Without a meeting, just a single line buried in an email. What they didn't know. The $19 million deal they were counting on couldn't move without my signature. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about quiet power and what happens when the person they tried to erase holds the final pen. The office had fallen quiet by then, only the low hum of the HVAC and the glow of her monitor keeping Sarali company. Most of the team had already left for the day, their goodbyes faint echoes from over an hour ago. But Sarali Reyes stayed. The deal on her screen was nearly done, $19 million. 12 months in the making. It was a contract that had taken her across 6 time zones through 3 language translators and more late-night calls than she could count. Every clause had her fingerprints on it. Every contingency had been wargamed, adjusted, and rewritten. And now, here she was, smoothing the final compliance paragraph for submission. A quiet ping from her inbox broke the rhythm. She clicked out of habit. Subject compensation. Update 1 line. Effective immediately, your base salary has been reduced by 40%. No greeting, no context, no name, no signature. For a moment, she thought it was spam, some glitch in HR's automated system. Her heart didn't quite race, but her fingers froze mid-air, hovering over her coffee mug as the meaning sank in. She reread it. Then again, still the same. 40% gone. Just like that. She didn't scream, didn't gasp, didn't even reach for her phone. She just stared, eyes flicking back and forth between the email and the $19 million deal she was about to deliver. It felt like a punch wrapped in silence. Sarali slowly lowered her hand to the desk fingers, no longer reaching for her coffee. She looked at the mug instead, the steam long gone cold. Her breath was shallow now, but steady. The kind of breath you learn to take when you've had enough time to build walls. It wasn't the money that gutted her. It was the cowardice. No conversation, no heads up, no chance to speak. They hadn't fired her. They hadn't suspended her. They just reached into her life and took nearly half her paycheck, expecting she'd keep smiling, keep showing up, keep handing over her brilliance until they could phase her out cleanly. Quietly, like turning down a light. She leaned back in her chair, eyes still locked on the monitor, but no longer seeing it. This wasn't survival anymore. It was betrayal. Sarali wasn't wealthy, not by any stretch. She had rent on a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Uptown, a Honda she still owed 6 payments on. She sent $400 a month home to her parents in El Paso. Her mother's arthritis treatments weren't covered by Medicare. Her father's memory was slipping. That 40%, it mattered. But what cut deeper wasn't the strain on her budget. It was the message behind it. They didn't even think she'd fight back because she was the steady one, the one who never asked for raises, the one who cleaned up the mess quietly when contracts fell apart, the one who didn't need to be seen, just trusted. And trust, she realized now, had been a one-way street. Her mind jumped to Elliot Rain's corporate climber. Smile too polished, always just dropping by for updates on the project. He had no authority over her team, but he always found a way to be in the room when presentations happened, always lingering near the spotlight just enough to be noticed, not enough to be accountable. Now looking back, his questions hadn't been about learning. They'd been about rehearsing. He wasn't building alongside her. He was studying how to replace her. And maybe now he had. But Sarali didn't panic. She didn't start printing resumes or typing angry replies. She sat still, because what they didn't realize, what Elliot hadn't accounted for, was that Sarali was the only one who knew every inch of this deal. She was the keeper of the compliance timelines, the interpreter of legal nuance, the architect of every revision that had earned the client's trust. And most importantly, the client was still waiting for her final sign-off. She closed the email. Then the contract. Then her laptop. The room around her was still quiet. The city outside blinked with life. taillights curving through the dark like veins. Somewhere out there, executives were preparing press releases for a deal they thought was already theirs. But they didn't know. They didn't know. She hadn't sent the final approval yet. They didn't know that Sarali had been quietly documenting everything. They didn't know that she was the firewall they'd underestimated. Her salary had been slashed. Her value had been questioned, but her resolve that had only sharpened. She stood, smoothed her blazer, and walked out of the office without a word. The battle wasn't going to be loud. It wasn't going to be messy, but it was coming, and it was going to be hers before the pay cut, before the betrayal, before the carefully calculated silence. There were the years when Sarali believed in the work. She had once called it love. Not in the romantic sense, but the kind of love that's quiet and steady, the kind that stays late on Fridays, logs in on Saturdays, and answers international calls at 2:07 a.m. because a client in Brussels doesn't care about Chicago time. She had built a reputation on reliability. Her badge never scanned in late. Her deadlines weren't missed. She coached new hires through messy onboarding documents, rewrote entire contracts others had butchered, and made sure every project she touched didn't just finish, but finished well. Sarali wasn't flashy. She didn't post wins on LinkedIn. She didn't network over happy hour. She believed her work would speak for her, loud enough to be heard in boardrooms, strong enough to earn respect. She believed that if you stayed long enough, proved yourself enough, helped enough, the system would hold you up in return. That's the lie. It began unraveling the day Elliot Rains asked her if he could lead the Geneva pitch. It had been her project from day one. She'd prepped it for weeks, building the deck, coordinating the translators, assembling data from 6 departments. The stakes were enormous. 7 board members from a Swiss energy firm looking for a sustainability partner in North America. A deal like this would anchor the company's international reputation. Elliot had been promoted just 2 weeks earlier. He was clean-cut, charming, with a voice that curled every sentence into a TED Talk rhythm, when he leaned over her desk and said, "I think the board will respond better to presence. Do you mind if I take lead?" She hesitated. Her name wasn't on the presentation title, just the file path. But he smiled, hands tucked casually into his blazer pockets like it wasn't a big ask. "We're a good team," he said. So she nodded. "Let's make it count." He took the clicker, walked into the room, called the CEO by the wrong name on slide 2, misstated the conversion between metric tons and short tons, stumbled through half the market analysis. But he laughed, and they laughed with him. Afterward, the clients clapped politely. No one mentioned the errors. A senior partner shook his hand and said, "Nice job." Elliot turned to her, grinning. "We're a good team," he repeated. Sarali smiled back. But something inside her, something small and bright, flickered. That was the first time. After that, it became habit. Elliot started showing up to meetings she hadn't invited him to. He'd linger outside conference rooms, offer to support presentations she'd crafted. He was never hostile, always polite. Friendly like a fox near a henhouse. He didn't steal credit in dramatic ways. No plagiarizing, no bold lies. Just presence. Just enough to be noticed, enough to look like a leader. And Sarali, she let him. Because she believed it didn't matter who stood in front of the projector, she was building something that would outlive them both. Besides, she wasn't in it for applause, she was in it for the impact. At least that's what she told herself. The truth was simpler. She didn't want to be the squeaky wheel. She didn't want to fight for visibility in a company that prized volume over value. She thought staying focused, staying good, staying indispensable would be her armor. So when Elliot forgot to CC her on a follow-up email, she wrote it off as forgetfulness. When he was praised in a quarterly meeting for spearheading international partnerships, she clapped. When he was invited to lead a task force on client success, the very task force she had outlined, she said, "Congratulations." And when new hires started calling him the guy behind the Geneva win, she smiled politely and changed the subject. Because she had work to do. Because it wasn't about credit. Right. That belief. This quiet loyalty carried her for years, through missed birthdays, weekends filled with revisions, and dinners gone cold on her kitchen table. She thought she was laying a foundation that would protect her. And she wasn't alone. So many women, so many diligent professionals had left comments echoing the same heartbreak. This was me. I gave everything and got left behind. They took my silence as weakness. It wasn't weakness. It was hope. Hope that if she just kept being excellent, no one would forget where the excellence came from. But now, standing on the other side of a 40% pay cut, Sarali saw it for what it was. She hadn't been protected, she'd been exploited. Her invisibility had made her convenient. Her dependability had made her disposable. It was never about whether she was good enough. It was about whether she was willing to disappear quietly. And she had been until now. Now, as the building she helped construct prepared for a grand unveiling, she was watching from the shadows. Watching Elliot shake hands with reporters. Watching her name fade from memory while he basked in borrowed light. But Sarali held something he didn't know about. She held the truth, and the truth was still unsigned. Back in the present, the silence around her wasn't just an absence, it was orchestration. Sarali stared at the email announcing the 40% salary reduction. The wording had no punctuation, no name, no sign-off, just that clinical phrase, effective immediately. It wasn't careless, it was intentional. Designed to leave no trace of personal involvement, like a knife wiped clean after the cut. And now, in the aftershock, she could see the whole outline. This wasn't about budgets. It was about removal. Surgical quiet, painless for them. Anyway. They weren't laying her off. That would trigger benefits, HR documentation, and internal conversation. No, this was subtler. Shrink the role, minimize visibility, starve the air around her until she opted out on her own. No mess, no noise. At first, she'd tried to believe it was isolated, but then came the patterns. Elliot had started requesting backups of her deliverables just in case something happened to the shared server, harmless on the surface. But they were always the polished versions. Red-lined contracts, notes from legal annotated compliance clauses, versions only she had access to. He began copying her on fewer emails. She'd find out about meetings after they'd happened. Updates she'd normally draft were now coming from his account repackaged in sleeker, emptier language. Clients she had built years of trust with were being handled by assistants who didn't even know their time zones. Then there was the alignment session. A casual phrase Elliot used to describe a series of off-the-record meetings with senior staff. She wasn't invited. She wasn't even told. She found out when a junior analyst slipped and mentioned the new post-signing rollout plan. What rollout plan? Her instincts kicked in low and primal. Something was shifting under her feet. This wasn't clumsiness. It was architecture. They were building a future that didn't include her. Sarali didn't panic. She didn't confront. She didn't call HR or send a rage-fueled reply. She watched. She noted every shift in tone, every sidestep, every accidental oversight that left her out of the loop. Because she'd seen this playbook before, but never this well rehearsed. They were waiting for the contract to be signed, for her utility to expire, for her to quietly walk away without disrupting the party, and that's where they miscalculated. They thought the cut would disempower her. Instead, it sharpened her. Because the one thing they hadn't stripped away was her access, her memory, her receipts. While they courted the spotlight, she made herself small deliberately. She blended into the background like a forgotten fixture, present but invisible. A shadow on the wall. And that's when the real power began. Every morning she logged in, reviewed the revisions, answered only when addressed. Her voice grew quiet, not from submission, but strategy. It's easy to underestimate the silent. Let Elliot bask. Let him smile and sell the story of a polished deal. Let him lead rehearsals, shake hands, prepare for the camera clicks. He thought the finish line was just ahead. But Sarali knew better. Because the most important clause in the deal, The final compliance stipulation was missing. She hadn't sent it. And without it, there was no signature. He didn't know that yet. Too busy bathing in praise he hadn't earned. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man trying to write her out of the story didn't even understand the terms. What Elliot failed to grasp, what most people like him always missed, was that success built on appearances has no spine. And when the weight of consequence lands, it snaps clean in half, but she wouldn't deliver that weight just yet. No, Sarali wasn't interested in sabotage. She wasn't seeking revenge. This wasn't about destruction. It was about clarity. She didn't want to burn it all down. She just wanted the light to be bright enough for everyone to see what had been lurking in the shadows all along. And that moment, it was coming. Let them trim her salary, let them starve her inbox, let them spin meetings without her name. None of it mattered because she still held the truth. The final clause, the real timeline, the compliance addendum signed by legal but not yet uploaded, all stored safely on a flash drive in her purse next to her house keys and the ring her mother gave her when she first moved to Chicago. She touched it absent-mindedly, now sitting at her desk listening to Elliot's laughter echo down the hallway. They'd built an entire celebration on faulty terms. She didn't need to yell to collapse it. She just needed to wait. And when the time came, she'd speak one sentence and watch it all fall. The days that followed felt surreal. Sarali walked through the halls of her office like a ghost that had decided to stay a little longer just to see how the story ended. She stopped offering corrections. She stopped initiating meetings. She let Elliot lead every call present, every slide, steal, every quiet nod of approval. He beamed through status updates, mispronounced key deliverables, skimmed over legal fine print with the confidence of a man who thought the ending was already written in his favor. And Sarali, she smiled, nodded, even took notes. It wasn't submission, it was patience. Invisibility had become her armor. The less she was noticed, the more clearly she saw. The signing was scheduled for Friday. Cameras had been confirmed, PR had rehearsed the announcement. Even HR, strangely chipper, reminded everyone to wear something on brand. The celebration wasn't subtle. Elliot was already floating through the floor like a newly crowned monarch. "Big day coming," he told the interns. "Our firm is about to make history." What he didn't realize. What none of them realized was that Sarali was the history. Without her, there was no deal, just a tower of stacked promises leaning quietly. Every evening that week, Sarali stayed late. Not to catch up, not to work, to document. She archived every version of the contract, backed up every annotated draft, redlined memo approval email. She cross-referenced legal's corrections with Elliot's final presentation and labeled them one by one, pre-legal, post-revision client-adjusted timeline, and finally, version A. Final signed version A was clean, compliant signed by legal, balanced on delivery and risk. Version B was chaos-inflated carbon offset numbers delivery promises the engineering team hadn't even seen, and most damning of all, an impossible launch date, June 1st. The client had explicitly requested August 15th with a grace period. She remembered that conversation vividly on a late Zoom call with Julia Keene, the lead from Norwal, whose sharp tone cut through screen fatigue like a scalpel. Julia had emphasized clarity, compliance, accountability. "We don't do surprises," she'd said. Especially not on paper. Elliot hadn't been on that call. But now version B, the one with June 1st, was the version circulating in the press kits. He'd sent it out himself, bypassing legal. No one else had noticed. Or, if they had, they were too eager to ride the wave to ask questions. But Sarali had noticed. And more importantly, only she had version A. It was printed, stamped, stored in her personal fireproof drawer at home. Tucked between a stack of old journals and a velvet pouch of coins her father had given her on her first day of work in Chicago Coins, he said to remind you that wealth isn't in money, it's in what you protect. Sarali had always protected the work, even when it wasn't hers to save. But this time, she was protecting herself too. Back at the office, Elliot's assistant approached her desk. A little too friendly, a little too rehearsed. "Hey, just double-checking." Do you have a backup copy of the final version? Elliot wanted all the files aligned for tomorrow. Sarali smiled version B. The assistant nodded too quickly. Yes, just in case. Sarali handed her a USB. On it, version B, the one Elliot had pushed, the one she knew they were scrambling to justify. Let them search. Let them believe they were cleaning up a trail, when in fact they were walking deeper into it. Later that night, she watched Elliot pacing in his office, phone pressed to his ear, hand gesturing wildly. Through the glass, she couldn't hear the words. But the motion said enough. He was worried. He should be. He'd built his big day on a version no one had cleared, and the one person who could fix it was done cleaning up his messes. Still, Sarali said nothing. This wasn't about revenge. She didn't want him ruined. She wanted the work respected. She wanted her integrity intact. She wanted to show that grace doesn't mean weakness and silence isn't surrender. Sometimes silence is the only space where truth can breathe. The day before the signing, she walked into the elevator with Elliot. He smiled that half smile. You ready for the big show tomorrow? She looked at him. Really looked. The gleam in his eye, the sweat just beginning to rise near his collar. He was nervous. Good. Wouldn't miss it, she said. He chuckled. Knew you'd come through? She smiled. Always. But this time she wouldn't come through for him. She would come through for the truth. And when the moment arrived, when the contract was placed on that velvet-lined table, under lights and cameras, she would be there, not to perform, but to correct the record. And then, let whatever needed to fall. Elliot Raines strutted through the office as if it were already his. He had traded his usual dress shirt for a perfectly tailored navy suit, complete with a gold tie clip and a watch that caught the light like applause. His walk was different, looser, smugger, like a man trying to rehearse what it would feel like to win. It was Thursday. The signing was set for 10 a.m. tomorrow. PR had transformed the 15th floor conference room into a theater. Branded banners, glass signage. Norwal's logo backlit in crisp white. A press list had been circulated with select media contacts invited to witness a major moment in green tech history. The caterers had arrived by noon to deliver the champagne. Crystal flutes sat waiting in a silver tray. And Elliot. He was busy thanking people who hadn't done the work. You crushed those last numbers, he told a junior analyst he hadn't spoken to in weeks. You really pulled through for the visuals, he told PR, who blinked in confusion. Even the CEO, David Schiller, made a brief stop on the floor, shaking hands. Beaming. Big day tomorrow, he said. I want everyone sharp. Elliot, great work. You've really taken leadership on this. Elliot smiled. Just doing my part. No mention of Sarali. She watched from her desk, unreadable, a quiet fixture tucked beside a floor-to-ceiling window. On her monitor, a spreadsheet open but untouched. In her bag, the drive that mattered. It wasn't here. None of it was. The legal drafts, the red-lined edits, the signed approval letters, the final compliance clauses the client had requested by hand, all encrypted, all at home, locked in the drawer beneath her father's coin pouch, and a printout of the first client brief she'd ever worked on. Her laptop in the office, empty, sanitized. If anyone tried to pull a copy, they'd get PowerPoint slides and an outdated draft with the client's name misspelled. Nothing critical, nothing useful. She had learned the hard way that systems don't always protect the people who build them. Around 2:30 p.m., Elliot's assistant, a young woman named Cam, approached her desk. Hey, Sarali, she said nervously, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Quick question, Elliot was wondering if you have any backup versions of the Norwal contract. Like a clean final just in case of tech issues. Sarali looked up slowly. She tilted her head in polite curiosity. You mean the version he sent already? Cam nodded too quickly. Yeah, just that one. He wants to make sure everything's aligned for tomorrow. Of course, Sarali said, reaching into her drawer. She handed over a USB with a faint smile. On it, version B, the one he'd sent without review, the one the client hadn't confirmed, the one bloated with impossible delivery promises. Cam thanked her and scurried off like someone who had just been asked to play courier for something fragile without knowing how fragile it really was. Elliot never came to check, never asked for confirmation, never even glanced in her direction. He assumed she had folded. He believed the pay cut had crushed her into silence, that her smiles in meetings and absence from credit lists meant obedience. He mistook her quiet for weakness. He didn't realize that in some women, silence is just the sound of calculation. By 4 p.m., the office buzzed like a show before curtain. Last-minute floral arrangements arrived. Pale blue hydrangeas imported carefully spaced along the signing table. Someone from comms ran down the hallway clutching a folder labeled official talking points. Another intern struggled to align the floor decals for press photographers and Elliot. He was posing, standing near the backdrop with the Norwal logo chin up, jaw angled slightly for the camera. "You're ready?" one of the execs said. "I was born ready," he replied. Saralee closed her laptop and stood up quietly. She didn't walk over, didn't interrupt, didn't say a single thing. She slipped on her coat and nodded at her team, then stepped into the elevator. On her way down, she glanced at her reflection in the mirrored walls, not for vanity, but for confirmation. She was still here, still calm, still holding the truth. This wasn't revenge. This was alignment. She wasn't standing in the way of Elliot's moment. She was simply refusing to stop him, because that's the thing about a lie, you don't always have to expose it. Sometimes all you have to do is let it speak for itself, and tomorrow it would. The morning sunlight filtered through the 31st floor windows, casting gold streaks across the lobby floor. Norwal's signature blue banners draped the walls embossed with their sustainability tagline, "Innovate for Tomorrow." The space had been transformed overnight into a gallery of illusions. Sleek glass displays, sculpted flower arrangements, rows of champagne flutes resting on linen-draped tables. Elliot was everywhere. His perfectly tailored navy suit caught the light just right. He posed by the Norwal backdrop, shook hands like a politician, and offered polished sound bites to early-arriving reporters. Today, he believed, was his coronation, the signing of a $19 million contract. The moment his name would be inked into Norwal's internal hall of fame. Saralee stood at the edge of it all, clipboard in hand. It wasn't real, the clipboard. It held nothing of substance, but it gave her a role, an excuse to be present. A placeholder in the story, Elliot had carefully rewritten one that no longer featured her. The client team arrived on time. Julia Keene, their lead representative, walked with the same precision as her emails, sharp, economical, unimpressed by extravagance. She bypassed the champagne and the camera setups, heading straight for the signing table. Her team followed like a pack of gray-suited wolves. "Good morning," Elliot beamed. "We're honored to have you all here. Shall we begin?" Julia offered a curt nod. Let's ceremonial pens had been laid out like museum pieces. Elliot stepped to the podium, cleared his throat, and began his speech meticulously rehearsed. He thanked the innovation team, the compliance team, and even logistics. He did not mention Saralee. She stood still, not even a flinch. Julia opened the leather folder containing the contract. She flipped through the pages quickly at first, then slowed page 6, page 7, page 8. Her brow furrowed. Just to confirm, she said, her voice smooth but slicing. Phase 1 delivery is listed here as June 1st. Elliot's eyes flickered. He stepped forward. Yes, that's the... We agreed to August 15th. Julia interrupted, now looking directly at him with a 2-week grace window that was confirmed last month. The room froze. Conversations halted. Even the camera crew tilted their heads slightly. Sensing the disruption, Elliot cleared his throat. I believe that might be a formatting oversight. Perhaps the wrong version was printed. Julia didn't blink. Is there a finalized version approved by legal that reflects the August terms? All eyes turned to Elliot's assistant. She scrambled with her tablet, her fingers trembling. I'll check, she muttered. More silence. Stiff, heavy Sarali stepped forward. 3 steps. Quiet. Certain. She didn't look at Elliot. That version wasn't approved. She said, her voice calm but absolute. I recommend we pause the signing. The sentence fell like a blade onto glass. Julia turned to her. In that moment, the flicker of recognition, not just facial but full-bodied. Her shoulders straightened. And you are Sarali Reyes, she replied. I was the original strategist on this project. I handled negotiations through the final compliance phase. Julia nodded slowly. Yes. We spoke during the clause alignment call in April. You did, Sarali said without emotion. The air shifted. The lie began to splinter. Elliot opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For once, the practiced charm didn't reach his lips. His face flushed, then paled. He looked between Julia and Sarali like he was seeing ghosts. Julia closed the folder. We'll resume when the approved version is submitted directly from your legal department. Until then, this is paused. And just like that, the cameras stopped clicking. Reporters glanced at one another. PR staff started murmuring into headsets. A pen rolled off the table and clinked against the marble floor. Elliot stepped back as if physically pushed. His assistant looked down, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Sarali turned, walking back to her place at the edge of the room. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply stood, hands behind her back, eyes level. Because this wasn't about revenge, it was the truth, finally speaking, and the silence that followed. That was the sound of the house beginning to fall. The room emptied faster than anyone could have predicted. Within 15 minutes, the clients had left without ceremony, no handshakes, no smiles, just stiff nods and clipped goodbyes. The press silently packed up their gear headlines, already forming in their minds. PR scrambled to regroup, whispering into phones and pulling Elliot aside with pale faces and taut expressions. Sara Lee stood near the glass wall, the city stretching out beneath her. She didn't move. She didn't have to. The wreckage was unfolding on its own. Elliot finally approached his polished mask, cracking at the edges. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. Sarali didn't flinch. Her eyes met his with steady precision. Correcting the record. That was all she said. She didn't yell. She didn't explain, because there was nothing more to say. She had let the truth stand up for itself, and it had roared. By early afternoon, HR called her in. The conference room was painfully neutral. Beige walls, minimalist decor, a faint scent of filtered air. Inside sat the head of legal, the compliance director, and a third person she didn't recognize, likely from risk mitigation. None of them met her gaze right away. We'd like to understand why you didn't raise concerns about the contract version sooner, legal began. Sara Lee folded her hands calmly on the table. No one asked me to be part of it. A beat of silence followed. The words settled in like bricks. You had access. You had knowledge, the compliance director said almost gently. Yes, I also had the original version approved and verified. But I wasn't invited to review the final submission. So I didn't. And why not escalate? Sarali tilted her head. Would you have listened? No one answered. After a long pause, she reached into her leather folio and slid a single white envelope across the table. My resignation. Effective immediately. They opened it slowly as if they thought there might be more. There wasn't. No accusations, no bullet points, no scorched earth farewell. Just one clean line. Sarali stood. Thank you for your time. And just like that, she walked out. She didn't look back as she cleared her desk because there was nothing left to take. She had already taken what mattered. Her name, her integrity, her truth. That evening, as she stepped into the elevator, she caught one final glimpse of Elliot down the hall, being ushered into a room by two senior executives. The blinds were drawn. The door closed. She didn't need to know what was being said. Outside, the Chicago air was brisk. It carried no celebration, no parade of vindication. Just stillness and freedom. Not just from the company, but from being erased. From being the silent architect behind someone else's legacy. This time, she had chosen her own ending, and it was quiet, but powerful. It had been a week since Sarali walked out of the Norwal building, 7 days without emails, without late-night calls, without the hollow weight of holding something together that was never built to hold her. She had returned her badge, deleted every meeting reminder, and turned off all notifications. She didn't miss the office. She didn't miss the pretending. Then the call came. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was unmistakable. Julia Keene. No preamble. No pleasantries. "We're resuming the deal," Julia said, "but not with Norwal, with you. As an independent consultant." Sarali sat up. Her pulse didn't race, her hands didn't shake. It wasn't surprise, it was recognition. "No middlemen," Julia continued. "No more rehearsed speeches or vanity presentations. We want the one who actually understood the scope, the one who kept us honest." The compliment didn't land like a compliment. It landed like a restoration. Not flattery. Clarity. Sarali didn't have to ask about Elliot. She already knew. She'd seen the headlines. Client walks from 19N. Signing internal oversight. Sparks collapse. She knew how these stories ended. Quietly. With names being removed from websites, with doors that no longer opened. "You'd lead negotiations," Julia added. "Your rate. Your timeline. Your terms." There was a pause. A week ago, Sarali might have hesitated. Might have considered whether Norwal needed to be looped in. Whether Elliot knew. But not now. Not after everything. "I accept," she said, voice calm. No glee, no vengeance, just quiet steadiness. The next morning, a contract arrived in her inbox. Her name at the top. A generous rate. Simple terms. No red flags, no buried clauses, no credit-sharing footnotes. She read every line anyway, not because she didn't trust Julia, but because she had learned to never stop being thorough. When she signed and sent it back, she didn't feel triumph. She felt something better. Ownership. That afternoon, she sat by the window of her apartment as the sky turned soft with evening. Coffee in hand, inbox clear. The city below hummed like always, but for the first time in a long time she wasn't racing to catch up. She had stopped trying to be essential to people who didn't see her and become indispensable to those who did. Meanwhile, Norwal tried to clean up the mess PR statements. Words like realignment and internal transition, Elliot's name disappeared from the leadership page. No ceremony, no explanations, just silence, the kind that follows someone being quietly erased. But Sarali wasn't focused on that. She had work to do, her own. Clients reached out one by one, people who had worked with her in the past, who remembered the calm in her voice during chaos, who remembered how she delivered results without noise or ego. And slowly, she built something new. No titles, no staged meetings, no one stepping in at the last minute to steal the light, just her fully seen, fully chosen. Not because she demanded it, but because she earned it. And this time no one could take it away. Sarali Reyes never returned to the office at Norwal. There was no farewell lunch, no parting words, no empty gestures. She simply walked away from a place that once tried to write her out of her own story, and in doing so she began to build something better, something hers. Her apartment transformed overnight. The desk by her window, once cluttered with project binders and corporate briefs, now held her own letterhead. The logo was subtle, elegant. Reyes Strategy and Compliance. Her first clients came quickly. A mid-sized tech firm in Austin remembered her calm during a chaotic merger. A healthcare nonprofit in Seattle cited the white paper she'd written 3 years ago, one that Elliot had taken credit for. The calls didn't come in waves, they came like a tide, slow, certain, unstoppable, and Sarali. She didn't try to be everything to everyone. She picked her clients, ones who valued clarity, ones who paid on time, ones who didn't ask for loyalty. They hadn't earned. Her home office grew warmer. Light filtered through linen curtains. A ceramic mug, handmade and slightly chipped, replaced the company-branded tumbler. On one wall, she framed a quote, "You don't have to be loud to be powerful." That quote became the title of a blog post she wrote late one Friday evening. It wasn't meant to go viral, just something she typed between sips of tea, reflecting on the month she spent invisible in boardrooms, on the weight of watching others speak over her, on the choice to walk away without burning bridges, but also without leaving a piece of herself behind. The post hit a nerve. Within days, the comments poured in. Women from tech, law, finance, mothers who had returned to work only to be sidelined, young professionals who thought silence meant safety. Even a retired VP who confessed she wished she had done what Sarali did 20 years earlier. Her inbox shifted from client contracts to mentorship requests. Could you speak at our internal leadership summit? Would you consider mentoring our associates? Would you write for our magazine? Sarali didn't say yes to everything, but she said yes to enough. Enough to know that what she had built was no longer just a business. It was a voice, one that didn't shout but resonated. She hosted her first workshop 6 weeks after walking away, a room of 23 women, most mid-career, some just starting out. The session was called Invisible Work, Visible Power. She didn't wear a suit. She didn't use slides. She told her story. The salary cut the contract. The quiet collapse. But more importantly, she told them how she rebuilt. How many of you have had your name left off? Something you built, she asked. Every hand rose. She nodded. The answer isn't always confrontation. Sometimes it's construction. Build something so rooted in your name, no one can remove it. A woman in the back, maybe early 20s, whispered, "But isn't that lonely?" Sarali smiled. It was. At first, but once you stop giving your energy to people who erase you, you make room for those who see you. Afterward, they lingered, shared stories, swapped emails. And when the room cleared, one woman stayed behind. She was in her 50s, graying hair, sharp eyes. She said, "I spent 20 years playing backup to men who couldn't lace their own strategy binders. I wish I had your courage." Sarali didn't respond with false humility. She just said, "You still can." And that was the point. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She wasn't trying to be famous. She was just trying to show what it looked like when a woman chose herself. Her days now were filled with contracts. She read by choice, calls she scheduled, projects she greenlit. And at night, when the city lights blinked on, she'd pour a glass of wine, pull out her journal and write not plans, not to-do lists, but reflections. She wrote about power, about dignity, about the day she let Elliot run toward a lie while she stood still in the truth. About how silence could be not weakness but preparation. And she kept writing. Because the foundation she was building wasn't just professional. It was personal. It was cultural. It was generational. In a world that still often rewarded volume over value, presence over principle, Sarali became a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just signs its own name and lets the world catch up. Sarali Reyes stood once again in the marble lobby of Norwal's downtown Chicago tower, but not as a strategist, not as a subordinate, and certainly not as the woman they tried to phase out. Today, she was here as a keynote speaker. Her heels echoed softly across the polished floors. No badge, no check-in. Just presence. As she stepped into the conference auditorium, no one questioned her. No one asked her to take notes or grab coffee. They turned. They looked. They listened. A young staffer handed her the microphone. She smiled, nodded politely, and stepped onto the stage. The spotlights hit her, but she didn't flinch. She no longer waited for light. She brought it. The room settled, executives, interns, industry, peers. The same company that once erased her was now framing her words in gold lettering on the event brochure. She began not with the deal, not with the betrayal, but with a truth. I used to think safety came from being indispensable. Now I know safety comes from being undeniable. The audience leaned in. She spoke not of revenge, but of redirection. She talked about the months after she walked out, the silence that followed, the clarity that came. She shared how Julia Keene's call changed the course of everything, not because it gave her validation, but because it reminded her that her work had always spoken. It had just been silenced by the wrong people. She talked about contracts negotiated with integrity, about mentoring women who were tired of being spoken over, about clients who paid for clarity, not compliance. Her voice never rose, but it filled the room. After the applause, she stepped off stage and walked the halls once more, not looking back with bitterness, but with clarity. Every closed door had simply rerouted her to one she could open herself. That evening, back in her apartment, she sat by the window. A soft breeze carried in the scent of spring. Her journal lay open on the desk. She wrote, "They tried to erase me quietly. Instead, I rewrote the ending." She paused, then continued. "I used to think the only way to win was to shout louder. But some of us don't raise our voices. We raise the standard." She smiled, closed the journal, and reached for her tea. On the wall above her desk was the framed quote that had traveled with her since her first workshop. "You don't have to be loud to be powerful." It wasn't just a mantra. It was a map. The next morning, Sarali received a request. A leadership institute wanted her to develop a curriculum teaching professionals how to identify silencing dynamics in the workplace and respond without self-erasure. She said yes, not for prestige, but for impact. And so she began building again, not a company, but a legacy. One where competence didn't need translation, where credit wasn't borrowed, where young women didn't have to choose between respect and resilience. On her final blog post of the season, she wrote, "Justice isn't always thunder. Sometimes it's just a door opening for the right person, and sometimes that person is you." The comments poured in. A newly hired analyst in Ohio wrote, "I printed your line and taped it above my desk." A project manager from Atlanta added, "Because of you, I spoke up in my last performance review. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just told the truth." Sarali read each message with quiet pride. She responded to many. Not with platitudes, but with encouragement, with direction, with belief, because she had walked through fire without asking to be saved. And when the smoke cleared, she didn't rebuild the old house. She built a stage. And from that stage, she didn't just tell her story. She made room for others to tell theirs. The final line of her journal that night, written in dark blue ink, "I used to wait for the spotlight. Now I build the stage, and outside, beneath the moonlight, Chicago pulsed quietly, not with noise, but with the hum of something true, something earned, something lasting."